Good afternoon and welcome to The Appeal Live, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvin-Almanza. 2020 was a nightmare year for everyone everywhere, but for cities across the US in particular, and few had it worse than Philadelphia. It was hit hard by the coronavirus and also by a rash of gun violence that reached nearly unprecedented levels last year. Throughout 2020 and 2021, the shootings have had police in Philadelphia scrambling and blaming anyone and everyone except themselves. So we often mistakenly think of police as a primary resource for preventing crime. But the truth is, that's not what police do. Usually police are called after the fact with an expectation that they would somehow solve the crime. But the Philadelphia Police Department's scapegoating here hides this deeply concerning trend about the department's own handling of homicides and shootings. Over the last 4 decades, the rate at which the department has managed to close the most serious violent crimes has plummeted, even as their budget has ballooned to new heights. Now, I said close. When we talk about crime, we often talk about police clearance rates. And what we mean by clearance rate is a case is cleared when the police have either solved it or have some other reason why it could be closed. For homicides, the crime that I am assuming we all care about, pretty much it's up there tops. The Philadelphia Police Department's clearance rate has dropped from nearly 80% in the 1980s to under 50%. Fewer than half of these cases are closed over the past few years. Clearance rates for assaults with a firearm have also fallen substantially from a high of 86% in 1969 to less than 20% last year. I am telling you that over 80% of these cases are not cleared. Philadelphia police are now simply failing to solve most of these crimes. Now, I think most people would agree that solving murders and other violent crimes are, like I said, tops, like among the most important things that society wants police to do. Yet, as the Philadelphia Police Department has gotten worse at fulfilling this critical responsibility, city officials have poured more and more money into that department and into policing. Perversely, though, there are other programs and initiatives that have proven more successful at addressing or even preventing violent crime. The money keeps going to the police while their own success rate keeps dropping. So Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney's initial 2021 budget, which was proposed last year, called for a more than $3 million increase for the police in March and more than an $11 million increase in May, while cutting money for homeless services, public art programs, mental health services. Only amid a nationwide uproar about the police killing of George Floyd did Kenney scrap that plan in favor of a small budget cut to the police. Now, all of this may seem a bit illogical. And if you think that, you are not alone. Over the past year, Philadelphia officials and advocates have been calling for a new approach to public safety that does not continually invest in the over-policing of non-white communities, while at the same time failing to protect them from serious violence. So joining me now to speak more about this issue, public safety and policing in Philadelphia, are Councilmembers Kendra Brooks and Jamie Gauthier, and Nicolas O'Rourke, Organizing Director for Pennsylvania's Working Families Party, and Devren Washington, a community organizer and activist from Philadelphia. All of you, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So let's start off with the council members. I'd like you to weigh in on the current state of affairs in your city regarding the violence and the ongoing political debate over how to respond to this. Where do things stand right now? And what, if anything, has changed? Councilmember Brooks, let's start with you.
I think, at the end of the last budget season, we talked about decreasing police funding and what it really means and what it means to community safety. And then over the summer, over this past year, we've seen increase in homicide. We've seen still police violence in communities. And the call to, change how we're funding the police department is still there, because what we do realize is that no matter how much we continue to increase the police funding, we have not seen safety in our community. And the spike in gun violence is proof that, if we think about between 2013 and 2020, our police budget has rose nearly a quarter. And the murders have doubled. and we're still in the same place. But part of the conversation is just making sure that we realize this investment that needs to be made needs to be in our communities. And you mentioned about how, so many critical social services were cut around our community, including services for young people, the lack of funding around mental health resources. Those are the conversations that we need to be uplifting. When we're talking about community safety, I know Nicolas likes to talk about safety that we can feel. In the current state that we're here in Philadelphia, we don't have safety that we can feel. Even as a council member, I think a week ago, it was a shooting at the corner of my block. Over the weekend, it was a mass shooting. And people want to see results, and they want results at multiple levels. And that's why it's important that we continue to have these conversations, because what we realize is we're going to continue to get the same results if we don't address the root causes of all these issues, which is mental health, lack of jobs, poverty, our housing crisis, our lack of education resources for everyone. Those are the things that, we have to continue to focus on in order for us to, really see what community safety and what public safety looks like in our community. I know my colleague that's on the line here has been doing a lot of work in her district around this specific work. So I'll give her the opportunity to talk about some of the work that she has been doing around this issue in Philadelphia, but the primary focus on the 3rd Councilmanic District.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about that. Councilmember, I'd like to get your take.
As you pointed out, it's a dire situation. We saw almost 500 homicides in 2020. At this point, not even 4 months into 2021, we reached about 110 homicides. And what's even more troubling is the amount of youth that we're losing to gun violence on a daily basis. As you referenced, the neighborhoods that I represent in West and Southwest Philadelphia have been impacted disproportionately by gun violence. In the past few weeks alone, we lost 4 young people, 2 15-year-olds and 2 16-year-olds to gun violence. And I'm hearing from my constituents who are afraid to go to and from work, afraid to let their kids play outside, and experiencing a significant amount of trauma from living in neighborhoods that experience shootings on a daily basis. So I see this as a public health emergency, a public safety priority, and I also see it as a racial justice issue, because Black and brown people in this city are not able to enjoy the same quality of life as other folks are. I think we need to invest much more in the things that would prevent and intervene in this violence. I would like to see us put more resources into street outreach. A lot of these conflicts are happening among young people. Some of them are generating on social media. I think we need many more credible messengers who can help to quell these conflicts. I think we need much more support to our youth, whether that be counseling or real jobs where they can support themselves, as well as other types of support that they may need to connect to opportunity and get on a different path. And I think we need to be investing in the things that help to prevent gun violence, like safe, fun opportunities for youth. We need to get our rec centers open. And so my push has been for this to be the #1 priority for the city of Philadelphia, and for us to use every resource at our disposal, whether that be government resources or resources in the private sector, to address the problem, because I think that that's what all of the young people that we're losing deserve.
So I'm hearing a lot of things that, when I think about them, do not strike me as police things. Mentoring, peer connections, activities for young people, alternatives like violence intervention, adjacent things, and also investments in mental health services and poverty alleviation and sort of the social safety net and opportunity, economic mobility, like a lot of things which I think someone could try to task the police with, but they are not the police's job. So Nicolas, I want to bring you in here to ask you about the role police are playing and kind of how they're dominating the conversation around the city's response here. So let's start with the first issue. What could the police be doing? Is there any use for the police in this conversation, like in response to these shootings? And how far away from what you see as the right answer are they?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having us today. I want to start by saying that I, as a principled abolitionist, do not necessarily see use for police. I see that it's part of the problem structurally. At the same time, I'm fully aware of the reality that many people are experiencing in our communities, the realities of death. I live about a block away, maybe a few blocks away from where Councilmember Gauthier already mentioned, around a 15-year-old who was killed. And this is not the only one that we have seen. And so the immediate need to address a very real problem, a life and death problem, is serious. And so to that end, I would love to see police working together with community groups like the Working Families Party, like the Investing in Safety We Can Feel It campaign initiative that has a number of groups, Movement Alliance Project is among others, that are brainstorming ways that we can provide actual structural change. From the political left, we never look at things as a bandage. We never try to solve things by putting a bandage over it. Oftentimes, police become just kind of a stopgap, something we can do to alleviate the pain in the immediate moment, but doesn't really resolve the root problem. And so what we would like to see is what both council members have already lifted up: actual investment in mental health and addiction recovery, housing and stability assistance, and police actually being willing to engage and recognize that they don't need these funds, that these funds need to go towards something that's going to radically change the way that we look at providing safety in our communities, not just penalty, not just police, but actual safety that, as we say, that we can feel. So I don't want to be too long-winded, but that's the kind of general response I have to that question about policing.
Thank you for making a very powerful point really effectively and efficiently. Devren, I want to bring you in on this because it sounds very common sense. And if I think, if I try to imagine being a police officer, I would also not want to do things that I was not trained to do. And I would also be grateful for other people doing things that they are more effective at, that they have a comparative advantage at. But I understand that logic and perception can often be really, really different things. And I'm wondering, in your experience, in your conversations in the community, how is this being messaged? I mean, do you see a group of people who are ready to vote for any politician who supports alternative responses to violence? Or do you see people who are still committed to an idea that police means safety?
I think there's a lot of work to be done within the community around just understanding a lot of the concepts that Nick was just explaining, right? Understanding that what our communities really want is to have a first responder, right? When they are in need, that they are able to call, right? I think some of the work that needs to be done is in understanding that first responder does not have to be the police, especially given the fact that we have a huge problem of racism that has been confirmed within our police department, right? And the number of human rights violations that they committed against the community over last summer. And I just wanted to touch on just a piece about just connecting the violence that we are seeing in our communities to the history of policy and what that plays, right? So we understand that the middle class was built. That was a policy decision, right? And the disinvestment that a lot of Black and brown neighborhoods are experiencing are also policy decisions that have happened historically and ongoing from the 60s all the way up until now, to the point where our schools are disinvested in, and we do not have a number of services that communities directly outside of Philadelphia that are not cities actually have access to.
So unifying that policy conversation that Devren just raised with the ideas about what people want, right? People want to be able to pick up the phone and call for help and get help. I'm thinking about Councilmember Gauthier, I'll start with you. There are communities elsewhere in the country that have been experimenting with alternatives to police as first responders. So I'm thinking of the Cahoots program in Portland, the STAR program in Denver, and I'm actually now thinking about the non-city or county agency mental health first program that's being piloted in Oakland, California. And I'm wondering, I know you voted against the $727 million police budget, the second highest police budget in 20 years. But I'm wondering, in your conversations with other city officials, are these alternatives being talked about?
Yes, they are. I think this particular conversation around mental health became even more urgent after the police shooting of Walter Wallace Jr., which happened in my district. And so he was a young man, a 27-year-old young Black man who was experiencing a mental health crisis. Police were called to the scene. He was shot within 41 seconds of the interaction, and in front of his mother, in front of his neighbors. And so I think that sent our city more urgently down the path of trying to find a different response. We are looking at a couple of different responses. So the police are moving forward, and had been at the time moving forward on a co-responder model where they will pair police with clinicians and mental health professionals. I and Councilmember Brooks and another Councilmember Gim, we're particularly interested in a civilian mental health response, and have been working with our city's Department of Behavioral Health to make sure that we can launch a model, a mobile crisis unit made up of civilians that can respond without police on the team. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to fund that through this year's budget. We're moving into budget season, and get the program off of the ground pretty soon.
So I guess this is a question for either or both council members. I want to discuss the role that the mayor, Jim Kenney, has played in all this, because as you know, as leaders of the city, mayors have a lot of power over the police department. They can hire and fire police chiefs. They establish budget priorities, and they have a big platform. They set the tone for the conversation and who they are amplifying and what voices from the community are coming out in the mayor's perspective. So I'm wondering how each of you would rate Mayor Kenney's leadership when it comes to his handling of the police department amid this violence. Councilmember Brooks, I'll start with you, and then we'll end the show with Councilmember Gauthier.
Wow. I feel that there's so much more that needs to be done. Councilmember Gauthier put out legislation calling for a state of emergency around gun violence, a public health emergency around gun violence, and it took a long time for us to even see the effects of that. And some of the things that we would have liked to see is a coordination, all hands on deck around gun violence in our city. And I feel that the response wasn't there. And now we're at a point that the homicide rate is above where we were last year at this time, and more needs to be done. I welcome more leadership around this issue, because what we realize is as the weather begins to change, I think we're expecting 70 degrees like towards the end of the week, and most people in most communities are terrified of what that could bring. And until the mayor fully steps up to the plate and comes up with a clear, coordinated effort around this issue, we could have a very terrorizing summer.
I just want to clarify for any of our viewers who are not totally clear on the reference to the weather. As things get nicer outside, as people go outside, the probability of police contact is a lot higher. The probability of negative contacts with other community members is a lot higher. People have a chance to be exposed to harm a lot more when more people are outside. I'm relying on my own public defender experience there, but I just wanted to clarify for viewers who are like, nice weather, what does that have to do with it all? Councilmember Gauthier, I'd like to close on any thoughts you have to add to that, and anything you see also as what you would like to see being supported in terms of investments going forward.
Sure. I want to start by acknowledging that this is a very hard time. It has been a hard year for mayors across the country, including Mayor Kenney. That being said, I would want to see more bold leadership on a lot of the areas that we've been discussing. My area of the city was tear gassed. We had an entire Black working class neighborhood tear gas during the civil unrest following George Floyd's murder. We also had civil unrest after the shooting of Walter Wallace Jr., where there was a lot of police misconduct. I would have wanted to see more bold leadership in that moment towards acknowledging that those events were wrong and that we need to move forward in a different way. And I would have wanted to see a more aggressive plan towards that change. And then, I've been pushing for at least the past 6 months for urgent action on gun violence in this city. Our city has the Roadmap for Safer Communities, which is our plan for addressing gun violence as a public health crisis. But I don't feel that we take it that seriously enough, and we tend to lean on law enforcement. That being said, we're moving into budget season. Now is the time for Philadelphia, the mayor and our city council to show we're serious about this issue. I want to see us deliver a budget to Philadelphia that has major investments in violence prevention, violence intervention, trauma services for our neighborhoods, and all of those supports that can get towards the root causes. Now is the time for us to really show up for our residents and show we're serious.
Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm really glad we got a chance to talk about this vital issue, and I look forward to checking in with all of you as budget season continues. I hope we get to have you back on to ideally deliver exciting news, or otherwise keep filling us in on what's really happening on the ground in Philly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there you have it. You've got a police department that's getting more and more money while solving fewer and fewer cases and stopping less, if any, harm. You've got people who are legislators and people on the ground in Philadelphia telling their elected leaders that what they actually want is funding for mental health services and homelessness prevention and violence interruption and peer mentoring and the kinds of things that actually make crime less likely to happen. Because after all, if crime is less likely to happen, police aren't needed to react to that crime. Budget season is coming. The summer is coming. People are getting more and more worried about violence that could happen, especially violence with the police involved, violence by police. So now is the time for Philadelphia to make major changes and invest in things that have been shown to actually keep communities safer instead of things that are only branded to do so. Thank you all so much for joining us here on The Appeal Live. I'm Emily Galvin-Almanza. We're doing another episode in a few minutes, so we look forward to seeing you right here, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you want to stream us in a couple of minutes. See you soon.